The deputy claimed she reversed into him. Then, both vehicles' data exposed the truth. The cruiser's push bumper met the driver's door with a flat, metallic crack that rolled down the empty stretch of Route 9. Adeza Colton felt the seatbelt lock against her chest as her Volvo skidded sideways onto the gravel shoulder. She did not scream, and she did not reach for her phone the way most people would. She sat still for 3 full seconds, running a mental inventory of her own body before she trusted it to move. Fingers, ribs, neck, all functioning. Through the windshield, she watched Deputy Wade Pruitt step out of his patrol car with the unhurried calm of a man who believed his version of events would simply become the record. A DA's reached beneath the dashboard, found the small toggle disguised as a fuse cover, and pressed it 3 times in careful rhythm. Her phone, resting face down in the console, lit up once silently and went dark again. 40 miles away, inside a windowless operations room lined with monitors, a duty officer watched a single indicator shift from green to amber, then to red. A voice at the next console said quietly that a protected asset signal had just gone active in Callaway County. Neither a DA's nor Deputy Pruitt yet understood how many people had just been told to move. 20 minutes earlier, the stop had begun the way thousands of stops begin. Deputy Pruitt's lights had come on behind her as she passed the county line, and a daisy had signaled, slowed, and pulled onto the shoulder well before he expected her to. She kept both hands on the wheel, and when he approached, she lowered her window and greeted him evenly. He told her he'd stopped her because her rear license plate looked like it had a cracked frame obscuring part of the numbers. It didn't, and both of them would eventually know it didn't, but she didn't argue the point. She handed over her license, registration, and insurance card, all current, all clean. He studied them longer than the documents required. Then he asked who the Volvo belonged to. She told him it was hers, registered in her name, which the paperwork already confirmed. He asked what kind of work paid for a car like that. She said she consulted on infrastructure systems, which was true if incomplete. He asked her to step out so he could take a look inside the vehicle. She asked politely what specific violation gave him grounds to search it. He said her attitude was giving him a reason to wonder what she was hiding. She said she'd be glad to wait for a supervisor to arrive, if there was a concern serious enough to justify a search. That offer seemed to bother him more than any accusation could have. It was not the first time a driver's calm had provoked him into using the cruiser itself as an argument. 2 prior complaints against him described tires drifting close enough during a stop to make a driver flinch toward the shoulder. Both closed as unintentional before anyone pulled the footage. He told her to stay in the car, walked back toward his cruiser, then turned around and told her the stop was over and she was free to go. A daisy checked her mirror, signaled, and began to pull forward. That was when Deputy Pruitt got back in his patrol car, put it in drive, and accelerated directly into the driver's side of her Volvo. There had been no swerve, no late reaction, no brake light flash beforehand, just forward motion, aimed. By the time the first county backup unit arrived, Deputy Pruitt already had a story assembled. He told the responding officer that Colton had suddenly reversed into him without warning. When a second unit pointed out that her car was facing forward, not backward, his account shifted, and he said his brakes must have failed on the loose gravel. When a bystander mentioned that his brake lights hadn't come on at all, he said he thought she might be attempting to flee the scene. Each version canceled out the one before it, and each one would end up in the same report a federal investigator would later read line by line. While local units argued about what they had just heard, a very different response was already converging on the same intersection. 2 unmarked government sedans peeled off the interstate exit 11 minutes after the Amber Alert had gone red. A DHS mobile command vehicle followed, its dispatcher relaying the same 3 questions on a continuous loop. Is the protected individual conscious? Is the equipment secure? Has the scene been preserved? The alert protected the credentialed custodian and the equipment she carried for the length of that transport assignment. It was not a standing security detail that would follow her once the mission closed. The lead sedan carried Regional Commander Elias Thorne, who had worked 2 prior assignments with Adeza Colton and knew better than to walk in asking about her resume. He arrived, badge already out, and the first thing he did was crouch beside her open door and ask if she could feel her fingers and toes. She told him she was fine and pointed, without drama, to the rear cargo compartment of the Volvo. Bolted into a reinforced case back there was a Meridian authentication relay, a portable module used to restore emergency radio and grid control communications across a 3-county region if the primary systems ever failed. She had been driving it back from a scheduled audit of a regional water treatment control network when Deputy Pruitt's lights came on behind her. The impact had cracked the outer housing and triggered an automatic tamper lockout, which meant the module's credentials were now invalid until a federal technical team could inspect and reauthorize it. A redundant relay still covered the region in the meantime, but losing this one cut the emergency reserve down to a single working unit until a replacement was certified. That was serious, but it was not the end of the world, and Commander Thorne treated it exactly that way. Controlled, procedural, without theater. He ordered the Meridian case moved to the DHS vehicle under 2-person control, had a technician log the tamper alert, and told the county's ranking officer on scene that Deputy Pruitt was to be separated from all other officers immediately. Only after that was done did he turn to the county sergeant and explain, without embellishment, that Ms. Colton held a federal security clearance tied to a critical infrastructure protection program, and that any further handling of the scene needed to account for that. He was careful, even then, to say the same thing twice, so no one could later claim they'd misunderstood him. The collision would have been a crime no matter who was sitting behind that wheel. The federal interest changed the resources involved, he said, not the underlying facts. Word of the collision had not stayed contained to the 2 patrol channels. A delivery driver named Rosa Felt, stopped at a red light 30 yards back, had captured the last 4 seconds on her dash camera and uploaded the original file, unedited, straight to the sheriff's office public evidence portal rather than posting a clipped version online. A woman walking her dog along the shoulder, Talia Reyes, gave a recorded statement to the first arriving trooper before anyone had a chance to discuss the incident with her. The clerk at the Route 9 fuel station across the intersection pulled the store's exterior camera footage and handed it directly to a federal evidence technician within the hour. None of the 3 had spoken to each other beforehand, and none of their accounts needed a DAZ's classified status to make sense. They simply agreed with the numbers that would come later. Those numbers arrived once technicians pulled the event data recorders from both vehicles. Deputy Pruitt's cruiser showed full accelerator input in the second before impact, with no corresponding brake pressure at any point in the sequence. The steering angle stayed essentially straight, ruling out any sudden swerve to avoid a collision he hadn't caused. A DAZ's Volvo showed forward motion consistent with a normal, unhurried departure from a completed stop, and no reverse gear engagement at any point in the preceding minute. Her own automatic braking system had triggered on impact, a half-second too late to prevent the crash but perfectly timed to confirm, on the record, that she had not been the one accelerating. An investigator from the Bureau's Regional Evidence Response Unit laid the 2 data sets side by side and noted, in her official summary, that the physical evidence alone would have supported charges against Deputy Pruitt, even if Colton had been an ordinary civilian driver with no federal ties whatsoever. That distinction mattered to the investigators, and it mattered to Adaze, who had asked Thorne early on not to let her clearance become the headline of the case. The deeper the investigators looked, the less this appeared to be one deputy's isolated failure. Callaway County's internal affairs file showed 6 prior complaints against Deputy Pruitt over 4 years, 5 of them involving stops of drivers in newer or higher value vehicles. 3 of those complaints had been closed as unfounded, without a single recorded interview of the complainant. 1 file was missing its dashcam attachment entirely, logged as corrupted, though the patrol car's own maintenance records showed no hardware fault reported that week. A sergeant's internal email, recovered during the federal request for records, referred to Pruitt's stop numbers as some of the best on his shift and suggested his methods, while unconventional, kept traffic stop statistics favorable for the district. 1 earlier complaint stood out from the rest. 2 years prior, a hospital nurse named Odalis Ferreira had reported that Deputy Pruitt forced her sedan onto the shoulder of the same stretch of Route 9 after a stop over a supposedly obscured inspection sticker. Her complaint described a scraped bumper, a shaken sense of safety driving that road after night shifts, and a case that was closed within a week, with a note calling the contact incidental. The patrol car's dashcam file from that stop had already been logged as corrupted by the time anyone asked for it, which was the difference between her case and Adaisy's. This time the data survived. When investigators reopened her file as part of the current inquiry, Ferreira told them she had stopped reporting near misses to the department after that, certain nothing would come of it. She was contacted again the week Pruitt was formally charged, and for the first time since the incident, she said she believed the file might actually be read by someone. Adaisy's own history came out gradually, and only where it was relevant. Commander Thorne's report noted briefly that she had spent 9 years with the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, including a rotation coordinating a plant evacuation during a chemical release scare that could have cost dozens of lives if it had gone 5 minutes longer. She left active federal service afterward to build the kind of preventive systems that made these kinds of emergencies rarer, which was also why she carried unusual clearance for a woman who now signed her emails with a civilian job title. She had declined 2 prior opportunities for public recognition tied to that evacuation, and she declined a third here, telling Thorne she would rather the file speak for the work than she would. That explained her stillness in the driver's seat more than any speech could have. Formal charges followed within 3 weeks. Deputy Pruitt was indicted on counts of aggravated assault with a vehicle, official misconduct, and making false statements to investigators. Federal prosecutors added a separate property damage count, resting on the intentional damage to a vehicle carrying protected federal property, rather than on any proof that Pruitt knew the equipment's precise contents. He was placed on administrative leave the same day, surrendered his weapon and badge, and was scheduled for a departmental hearing where he would be entitled to representation before any final personnel decision was made. He was also ordered to undergo an independent certification review before any future law enforcement employment in the state, separate from both the criminal case and the department hearing. The 2 supervisors who had signed off on the earlier downgraded complaints were removed from all complaint review duties pending an audit of every case they had ever closed, and one resigned before his own hearing could be scheduled. Pruitt rejected an early plea offer and chose to take the case to trial, even though the telemetry left his defense little room to dispute that the collision had happened exactly as the data showed. Out of the investigation came a set of changes the county board adopted within the year. Any collision between a patrol vehicle and a civilian vehicle during a stop now triggers an automatic, independent review outside the officer's own chain of command. Event data recorders are pulled and preserved within hours rather than left to routine maintenance schedules, and any patrol vehicle collision now triggers an automatic preservation hold at the dispatch level the moment it's logged. Officers involved in a use-of-force incident give their first statement before viewing any camera footage, not after. Community members who submit their own video now receive a secure, direct upload link straight to an independent oversight office, bypassing the department that might have an interest in how the footage is framed. 6 months after the new complaint review rule took effect, a resident 3 towns over used it to report a stop that looked, on paper, almost identical to Ferreira's old case. This time, an independent reviewer pulled and preserved the dashcam before it could be overwritten on the routine cycle, interviewed the driver directly, and only read the officer's final report afterward. The file was formally opened within 2 days instead of being closed within 1. Adaisy read that update in a routine memo, without a name attached, and felt something settle that had nothing to do with her own case. On a clear morning some weeks later, she drove the repaired Volvo down Route 9 again, alone, without a federal escort trailing behind her. The replacement authentication module sat in its case in the back, freshly certified, its tamper lock reset and logged. She passed the intersection where Pruitt's cruiser had struck her, checked her mirrors out of habit rather than fear, and kept driving toward the water treatment facility on her schedule for that week. There was no convoy, no announcement, no one waiting to applaud her at the gate. Just a woman doing the next piece of ordinary, necessary work, exactly the way she preferred it. This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes.